So this video is going to be about the next two sections of the pattern of inquiry about instituting a problem and determining a solution. I'm going to do these together because the first section's kind of short, second section's kind of long, but I don't want to divide it up. So we're just going to continue through sections 2 and 3 in the talking about the pattern of inquiry. And there's not a whole lot to say, so I don't think it'll be too long. I mean, there's not a lot of real difficult stuff here. I think it should be fairly straightforward. So let's get started with institution, the institution of a problem. And you may recall that in the previous section, we were talking about the antecedent conditions of inquiry, the indeterminate situation, a situation that's unclear, undefined, that we're trying to clarify, turn into a coherent situation where we have an idea of what to do. So, institution of a problem, Dewey writes that the unsettled or indeterminate situation might have been called a problematic situation, so we could have used already this term problematic, but, he says, this name would have been, however, proleptic and anticipatory, so it would have kind of told us too much. It would have anticipated that we were going to define it as a problem where that might not necessarily have been the case. It could be left indeterminate. But even to kind of define it as a problem is to give it some kind of determinateness. So the indeterminate situation becomes problematic in the very process of being subjected to inquiry. So when we start inquiring, because we have this indeterminate situation, right? If we choose to begin an inquiry, it becomes problematic. The indeterminate situation comes into existence from existential causes, just as does, say, the organic imbalance of hunger. So, again, as hunger is a kind of existential, material, physical thing, and Dewey's going to say existential rather than kind of physical, because physical has maybe problems associated with it, but Dewey tends to use this word existential, kind of really existing. So hunger has really existing causes. An indeterminate situation has real existing causes as well. There is nothing intellectual or cognitive in the existence of such situations. Nothing purely intellectual, although they are the necessary condition of cognitive operations or inquiry. So existences, particular kinds of existences, are necessary conditions for cognition and inquiry. But in themselves, they are precognitive. The first result of evocation of inquiry is that the situation is taken, adjudged to be problematic. So we're going to define it as a problem. There's some problem here in this situation. It's indeterminate. Why is it indeterminate? Well, let's call it a problem. Let's treat it as a problem that we can find some solution to. To see that a situation requires inquiry is the initial step in inquiry. So we're deciding now that this indeterminate situation is such that we want to find out more about it. We've begun treating it as a problem. There's a footnote here. I'll quickly just look at that. It's not super important, but footnote 5. If by two-valued logic, Dewey writes, if by two-valued logic is meant a logic that regards true and false as the sole logical values, then such a logic is necessarily so truncated that clearness and consistency in logical doctrine are impossible. So he doesn't like this kind of conventional view of logic at the time where you're dealing with statements that are true or false, only true or false. Last sentence here is interesting. He writes, being the matter of a problem is a primary logical property. So I don't know exactly what to say about that, but just that last line in the footnote is interesting. Being the matter of a problem is a primary logical property. So that something contains or is part of a problem is a primary logical property of it. Moving on, however. So Dewey writes, qualification of a situation as problematic does not, however, carry inquiry far, but it is an initial step in institution of a problem. A problem is not a task to be performed which a person puts upon himself or that is placed upon him by others, like a so-called arithmetical problem in schoolwork. Right, so that's pretty straightforward. It's not just a task. A real problem is not simply a task to be performed, like solving a math quote-unquote problem in school. So a problem represents the partial transformation by inquiry of a problematic situation into a determinate situation. So we're on the road toward transforming this indeterminate situation, this now problematic situation, into a determinate situation. So a problem is a step in the process of some indeterminate situation of life. It's not a kind of abstract thing that we can just do, at least a real problem, right? Those are kind of the classroom problems we might call virtual problems, in the sense that someone like Susan Langer talks about art as being a kind of virtual reality with its own virtual dimensions, or a kind of rehearsal or practice for real life. But it's not like a real problem because it's not an indeterminate situation. But a real problem is a step on the, instituting a situation as a problem is a step on the road toward constructing a determinate situation out of a real existential indeterminate situation. It is a familiar and significant saying that a problem well put is half solved. To find out what the problem and problems are which a problematic situation presents to be inquired into is to be well along in inquiry. So you may have heard that saying that stating the problem is half the solution or something like that. Dewey is referring to here. An important part of solving a problem is well formulating the problem or the question. To mistake, and this is another kind of Deweyism, which you see in various writings where he separates miss and take. To mistake something, right? Mistake. He's playing with the word mistake here. Making a mistake is to mistake something, take something in the wrong way. So to mistake the problem involved is to cause subsequent inquiry to be irrelevant or go astray, right? If we formulate the problem in the wrong way, then we're going to go about solving the real problem in the wrong way, in respect to a better formulation of the problem. We'll be doing irrelevant things, going in the wrong direction. Right, I have kind of an example. Maybe I'll start bringing it up here, where I have a leak in the roof. So that's kind of the problem that I deal with. I know there's a leak. That's kind of a vague formulation of the problem. I don't know the exact cause of the leak. So I've tried various things, which have turned out to be mistaken. I've mistaken what is the kind of source of the problem. So I've tried various kinds of solutions. But the problem still remains. So my subsequent attempts at inquiry have apparently been irrelevant, because at least the kind of main leak remains pretty much ineffective, although I have ameliorated the problem, let's say, through other means, but I have not been able to deal with the source of the problem. So the problem remains. I have, in some ways at least, gone astray. That's kind of a simple example. You can maybe think of better ones where we misformulate the problem. Without a problem, there is blind groping in the dark. So if I just notice that there are pools of water on the floor, but I can't figure out what's going on, I might be blindly groping, described as blindly groping in the dark. I'm cleaning up the water, but I don't yet know where the water is coming from. Someone could have spilled something there. It could be from a pipe. It could be from a leak in the roof. It could be from any number of things. It could be from a sink. It could be from condensation from the freezer or refrigerator. It could be from any number of places. But as long as I'm don't have kind of any hint about the source of the problem, I'm groping in the dark. I don't really know what the problem is yet. I know there's water, but what is the actual specific problem? The way in which the problem is conceived decides what specific suggestions are entertained and which are dismissed. Right? So if I decide that the leak is a pipe, I'm going to go, come up with one set of suggestions. If I decide it's the roof, I'm going to come up with another set of suggestions about what to do. Need a little drink of water. What data are selected and which are rejected? It is the criterion for relevancy and irrelevancy of hypotheses and conceptual structures, right? Because we can't just do everything to make a indeterminate situation determinate. We have to choose. We have limited resources, limited time, all kinds of limitations. So we need to formulate a specific problem so that we can do particular things. And the way we formulate the problem is going to select certain things, reject other things, right? We have to select things that we think are relevant, that seem to be relevant to the problem at hand. On the other hand, to set up a problem that does not grow out of an actual situation is to start on a course of dead work, nonetheless dead because the work is busy work. So here he's referring more to like classroom kinds of activities. And of course, this also is a reflection of Dewey's theory of education, where he wants students to be dealing with real practical things, actually growing things, actually making useful things, and that kind of thing, not just doing busy work, not just doing these artificial classroom exercises. Problems that are self-set are mere excuses for seeming to do something intellectual, something that has semblance, the semblance, but not the substance of scientific activity. Okay, so more of that. Let's move on then. So I think that should be fairly clear about what it means to institute a problem, right? We're going from a situation that's indeterminate, where we don't yet have an idea of what the problem is. Like we first come into the room and there's water all over the place. So there's an indeterminate situation. There's not supposed to be water all over the place. Why is there water all over the place? What's going on? And we're instituting a problem. All right, we'll try this and this. We'll observe. We have a leak, right? That would be one formulation of the problem. The roof is leaking. That will cause us to select a certain path of subsequent inquiry, reject another path. It looks like it's coming from the wall. Maybe there's a pipe leaking. That will cause us to select and reject other things. All right, so moving on to the determination of a problem solution. So statement of a problematic situation in terms of a problem has no meaning save as the problem is instituted, has, in the very terms of its statement, reference to a possible solution, right? So when we formulate a problem, we're already kind of pointing the direction to the kind of solution that it will have. Just because a problem well stated is on its way to solution, the determining of a genuine problem is a progressive inquiry. The cases in which a problem and its probable solution flash upon an inquirer are cases where much prior ingestion and digestion have occurred. So there's those certain situations where you determine what the problem is and you know the solution right away. Oh, I need to do this. The problem is X. Oh, I need to do Y. So we've already have the knowledge that we need. We've already thought through this kind of problem before. We've seen this kind of problem before. We've had much ingestion and digestion of similar cases, of the right kinds of knowledge, the right kinds of experiences. If we assume prematurely that the problem involved is definite and clear, subsequent inquiry proceeds on the wrong track. But this can be mistaken, right? So if we assume too much at first, then we'll proceed on the wrong track. We'll go in the wrong direction. We'll do the wrong things. Dry throat today. All right. So we don't want to assume too much. We don't want to assume that the problem is more definite than it is. We don't want to jump to conclusions, as we say. Hence, the question arises, how is the formation of a genuine problem so controlled that further inquiries will move toward a solution? So how can we best formulate our problem so that we can move toward a solution without moving in the wrong direction, toward the wrong solution? The first step in answering this question is to recognize that no situation which is completely indeterminate can possibly be converted into a problem having definite constituents. So there must be something determinate. It can't be completely indeterminate, or we'd be completely confused. The first step, we'd have no idea where to begin, right? So the first step then is to search out the constituents of a given situation, which as constituents are settled. So what is settled in the situation? We may not be able to tie these things together yet into a situation that makes sense to us, but there are going to be certain things where we know what they are. We're pretty sure about these features of the situation. Dewey writes, when an alarm of fire is sounded in a crowded assembly hall, there is much that is indeterminate as regards the activities that may produce a favorable issue. So there's a lot that's undecided, unknown. One may get out safely, or one may be trampled and burned. The fire is characterized, however, by some settled traits. So we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know exactly what's going on, but there are some settled traits. It is, for example, located somewhere. We are somewhere in some location. Perhaps we know that the fire is somewhere, right? We know the fire is somewhere. We may not know exactly where it is. Then the aisles and exits are at fixed places, right? So there are certain features of the room we're in that are settled. We know we might see exit signs. We might see where the aisles are. Since they are settled or determinate in existence, the first step in institution of a problem is to settle them in observation. So, it's a fact that the exits are somewhere when you're in a building. If you're in a kind of auditorium, there are aisles. There is a fire somewhere, presumably, right? It could be a false alarm. So then we need to settle them in observation. Look and see where those things are, if we can figure out where those things are. There are other factors which, while they are not as temporally and spatially fixed, are yet observable constituents. For example, the behavior and movements of other members of the audience. So these are fluid, these are changing, these will be hard to observe, and yet they are observable. They are existential constituents of the situation, right? How the audience is reacting. All of these observed conditions taken together constitute the facts of the case. They constitute the terms of the problem because they are conditions that must be reckoned with or taken account of in any relevant solution that is proposed. So what are we going to do? We've got this fire alarm. We're in a crowded auditorium. We have to take account of these factors. Where are the exits? Where are the aisles? What is the state of the audience? What are they doing? How are they reacting? These are real things we can observe that must be dealt with moving forward. Just checking what page we're on, 113. So a possible relevant solution is then suggested by the determination of factual conditions which are secured by observation. So we have to observe conditions to get to a possible relevant solution. We get a suggestion. The possible solution presents itself, therefore, as an idea, just as the terms of the problem, which are facts, are instituted by observation. So the possible solution is an idea. We get an idea, another key word in Dewey. So observation gives us facts. When a solution suggests itself, that's an idea. What is an idea? Ideas are anticipated consequences, forecasts of what will happen when certain operations are executed under and with respect to observed conditions. So anticipated consequences. So an idea is an idea of what will happen if we do certain things. Right? So when I have an idea to fix my leak, I'm anticipating consequences. I'm going to do this, it's going to have this consequence. I'm going to put some sealant here, it's going to have this consequence. Right? I may be wrong. An idea is not, we can't assume that it's a true idea, that if we do this, certain things definitely will happen. But we're anticipating what will likely happen. What is likely to happen if we do this. And there's a footnote here, which I do want to look at just briefly. It's not super important, but it is maybe worth mentioning. So footnote 6, he says that the theory of ideas that has been held in psychology and epistemology since the time of John Locke's successors, is completely irrelevant and obstructive in logical theory. So he's rejecting the Lockean theory of ideas. For in treating them as copies of perceptions or quote-unquote impressions, it ignores the prospective and anticipatory character that defines being an idea. So I want to just emphasize that ideas are defined by their prospective and anticipatory character. Going on with the footnote, Dewey writes, failure to define ideas functionally in the reference they have to a solution of a problem is one reason they have been treated as merely mental. So defining ideas functionally. Ideas are functional things. Finishing up the footnote, the notion, on the other hand, that ideas are fantasies is a derivative. It's a derivative of this primary function, of this primary characteristic of ideas as being functional, I should say. And Dewey says, fantasies arise when the function of an idea, when the function an idea performs is ruled out when it is entertained and developed. So for something to be a fantasy, you're kind of abstracting that functional aspect of it. To just entertain the idea as an idea. Let's continue on. So Dewey writes, observation of facts and suggested meanings or ideas arise and develop in correspondence with each other. So observation and ideas are correlative. They correspond to each other in development. They're not separable things. The more the facts of the case come to light in consequence of being subjected to observation, the clearer and more pertinent become the conceptions of the way the problem constituted by these facts is to be dealt with. Right? So observing more carefully makes clearer one's ideas of how to deal with it. So observing when my leak happens, where it seems to be coming from, how much the leak is under different conditions. Is it more or less at different temperatures? Right? All these things could potentially help me solve my problem. And then experimenting, of course. Dewey doesn't really talk about experiment here. That's later on, but in any case, I think you get the point. So observation and ideation go hand in hand. On the other side, the clearer the idea, the more definite, as a truism, become the operations of observation and of execution that must be performed in order to resolve the situation. So as our ideas develop, we have a better sense of what to observe, about how to operate, about what to do. Right? So there's this circular thing that you so often find in Dewey's logic. There's a circular cycle. Maybe cycle is a better word for it because it's progressive, right? Dewey talks up here about progressive inquiry, right? This is an aspect of progressive inquiry. The better our observations, the better are our ideas, the clearer our ideas, the better our observations. I think I'm down here. So an idea is first of all an anticipation of something that may happen. It marks a possibility, right? So just kind of reiterating what Dewey has said before. It's an anticipation of what may happen. When it is said, as it sometimes is, that science is prediction, the anticipation that constitutes every idea, an idea So let me try that again. The anticipation that constitutes every idea an idea is grounded in a set of controlled observations and of regulated conceptual ways of interpreting them. So when we talk about science, right, science involves prediction. We say prediction and observation when we're talking about science. But it's observation in a controlled way. We've got a method for how we're going to do it. We're going to measure things at particular intervals of time. We're going to use particular instruments, particular technologies to observe things and to measure things. So we've got a methodology behind our observations and behind how we are going to come up with ideas. So there's a regulated conceptual way of interpreting our observations. We've got a theory. We're working from a theory, whether it's a physical theory, a medical theory, a psychological theory, right? So we've got controls at both ends. On observations, we're doing things in a methodical way, and in terms of the concepts we use, we've got a theory. That doesn't mean that these things are fixed in stone. They should be refined as the inquiry proceeds, but it's not a kind of haphazard way where we're checking things in an arbitrary way, measuring things arbitrarily, working from a kind of mishmash of folk theories and scientific theories and so on. All right, because inquiry is a progressive determination of a problem and its possible solution, ideas differ in grade according to the stage of inquiry reached. At first, save in highly familiar matters, they are vague, right? So my leak problem, at first I have a vague idea of what to do. So I've determined that the leak is coming from a particular place in the ceiling. So I have a vague idea that I need to go up there and patch it somehow, or cover over it somehow, or at least put something to collect the water, right? I've got a vague idea of what I need to do. They occur at first simply as suggestions. Suggestions just spring up, flash upon us, occur to us, right? This will be based on kind of prior experience, prior exposure to different kinds of problems. The suggestions may then become stimuli to direct an overt activity, but they have as yet no logical status. So I've got this suggestion about what to do, but I don't yet know exactly my course of action. Every idea originates as a suggestion, but not every suggestion is an idea. So the suggestion becomes an idea when it is examined with reference to its functional fitness, its capacity as a means of resolving the given situation. So it becomes an idea when I actually work through, well, is it actually likely to work? So I've got all these different suggestions of what I can do, right? I've got a leak. I can call someone to try to fix it. That raises its own problems. I can go up there myself and look around. I can start patching over the bottom part of the leak where the water is actually coming out. I can do this or that. I can put down a bucket. It becomes an idea when I see, well, which of these is the most likely to give me a good result? Let's go through these. Which is the most likely to actually resolve the situation? And that's going to be my idea of what to do. This examination takes the form of reasoning, and we'll talk about reasoning in the next section, but this examination takes the form of reasoning, as a result of which we are able to appraise better than we were at the outset the pertinency and weight of the meaning now entertained with respect to its functional capacity. That's a bit of a mouthful, but we're examining these different ideas, these different meanings that arise from the problem as we have formulated it, and looking for the functional capacity of these different suggestions. But the final test of its possession of these properties is determined when it actually functions. That is, when it is put into operation so as to institute, by means of observations, facts not previously observed, and is then used to organize them with other facts into a coherent whole. So when we actually start testing this idea, we'll make new observations, right? This is kind of experimentation. We're getting into experimentation here a little bit, even though that will become more explicit later on. But we're making a kind of intervention into the world and see what happens. Get new facts, which we can then use to better make sense of the facts we already had, put them into a more coherent whole. Because suggestions and ideas are of that which is not present in given existence, the meanings which they involve must be embodied in some symbol. So we need a symbol for our idea. Without some kind of symbol, no idea. A meaning that is completely disembodied cannot be entertained or used. Since an existence which is an existence is the support and vehicle of a meaning and is a symbol instead of merely physical existence only in this respect, embodied meanings or ideas are capable of objective survey and development. To look at an idea is not a mere literary figure of speech. And this can be hard to understand. So on the one hand, I have the idea that I'm thinking of, we say in our head, right? I'm kind of making, kind of imagining what I might do. But there's also objects that kind of embody that idea. So if you take a roll of waterproof tape, right? Tape by itself is not really anything, or it could have many different meanings, right? You can use tape for many different purposes, but it can also be a symbol to me of my idea of patching a particular part of the roof, right? At least as a temporary solution. So a roll of tape, duct tape, let's say, is also symbolic to me of my idea, or an embodiment of my idea, right? Again, duct tape is not symbolic in and of itself, but it is not necessarily symbolic of this particular solution because it has many different functions. We can use it for many different things. It can also be just kind of a brute existential thing, just there. But it also can be a symbol when it's in a particular problem situation or brought into a particular problem situation. So just kind of finishing up here, I think. Yeah, finishing up. Dewey writes that suggestions have received scant courtesy in logical theory. It is true that when they just pop into our heads because of the workings of the psychophysical organism, they are not logical. Right, so we're always having suggestions, right? Things suggest themselves to us. I could do this. I could do this. Maybe I should turn right here instead of left like I usually do. Right, we're always kind of having suggestions, but they're not necessarily logical just as suggestions, but they are both the conditions and primary stuff of logical ideas. The traditional empiristic theory reduced them, as has already been pointed out, to mental copies of physical things and assumed they were per se identical with ideas. So he's referring to kind of Lockean, Humesian empiricism, where suggestions are copies of physical things. And I don't recall at the moment if Locke makes a distinction between suggestions and ideas. Anyway, Dewey seems to imply that he does, or other empiricists do. Anyway, moving on. Consequently, empiricism ignored the function of ideas in directing observation and in ascertaining relevant facts, right? If you take ideas as just copies of things already in the world, then you're missing the function of ideas in directing observation. In actually directing what we see, not just copying what we see, but directing what we see. We don't need, not just seeing, right, but observation kind of in general, which could involve various other modalities, sensory modalities. I don't want to just focus on sight here. The rationalistic school, so talking about rationalism, kind of Cartesian, Kantian rationalism, on the other hand, saw clearly that facts, apart from ideas, are trivial, that they acquire import and significance only in relation to ideas. So facts in and of themselves are trivial, right? Facts separated from our values, from our ideas, are as good as meaningless. But at the same time, rationalism, failed to attend to the operative and functional nature of the latter, of the operative and functional nature of ideas. So it grasped that ideas were important in kind of making meaning of the world, but they missed why this is functional in human life, what this does for human life. Hence, it treated ideas as equivalent to the ultimate structure of reality. So it saw ideas as part of the structure of reality, constituting reality with a big R, rather than these kind of operational, functional, dare I say, pragmatic things that Dewey sees them as. The Kantian formula that apart from each other, perceptions are blind and conceptions empty marks a profound logical insight. This is a famous phrase from Kant. I don't think Dewey is giving it exactly. I forgot. I was going to look up the exact thing, but you can look it up. It's a famous statement by Kant about perceptions and conceptions, the one being blind, the other being empty without each other. The insight, however, was radically distorted because perceptual and conceptual contents were supposed to originate, in Kantianism, from different sources, and thus required a third activity, that of synthetic understanding, to bring them together. Right, so this is kind of classic Kantianism. In logical fact, perceptual and conceptual materials are instituted in functional correlativity with each other in such a manner that the former locates and describes the problem, while the latter represents a possible method of solution. So in inquiry, in logical inquiry, perception is how we describe the problem, gives us the facts that are the problem, while conception, cognition, institute our solution, give us possible solutions. They represent a possible method of solution. So we've got this kind of correlation again between facts and ideas, perception, conception. These things are proceeding together in a kind of this cyclical fashion, where progress in the one gives progress to the other, helps us develop the other. Both are finally checked by their capacity to work together to introduce a resolved, unified situation. Right? So there's limitations on them, or kind of the guidance on them, or channels on their development is this capacity to get to a unified situation, to function toward bringing about a coherent situation where we know, okay, so we've got the problem, now we know what to do. As distinctions, they represent logical divisions of labor. That's kind of an interesting way to put it, at least, right? So perception, conception are divisions of labor. They're divisions of one thing. It's not two different things where you need a third thing to bring them together. They're two parts, two phases of an activity, of a human activity in the context of life. All right, so that went on a little bit longer than I thought, but we got through those two sections 2 and 3, and we're ready to move on to reasoning in the next video. All right, see you next time.